Alright, this podcast is for CNT140. This is on Chapter 18, our last chapter. Woohoo! On training and certification. Our goals really here is just looking at training and certification for cabling, talk a little bit about job descriptions, resources, that sort of thing for training and certification. Now, just to kind of put things in perspective, up until now, probably in your career you were aware of, EIA, CompTIA A+ certification, CompTIA Network Plus certification, Cisco networking certification. One thing that probably didn't occur to you is certification in network cabling installation, troubleshooting, maintenance, that sort of thing. This is a whole nother area of certification, and that's really the focus of this chapter. And the reason being, if we start looking at LAN wiring has become increasingly complex as we have increased the bandwidth. When we were dealing with, 10 meg coax bus, but we're dealing now with gigabit, 10 gigabit, and pushing into the 40 gig envelope. Our network bandwidths and speeds have increased dramatically, so the installation techniques need to be a lot more careful. So we need to have proper install for this, and therefore we need a substantial amount of knowledge to do this correctly. So if we look back in time, we've gone from old terminals to with coax to RS-232 serial connections to coax buses, coax Ethernet, over to twisted pair star switches, hubs, that sort of thing. We have progressed dramatically, and because of that, our cabling has developed dramatically. In the 1960s and 70s, we had terminals connected to mainframes using coax cable. Controllers were placed on each floor. Controllers were relatively close. That's kind of the beginning of having the wiring closets. This is basically the beginning of telecommunications rooms or telecommunications closets that we have. And the driving force of this was the cost of coax. As we move into the 80s, we had RS-232s, or kind of our serial cables, multi-conductor cable. This limited our distance to about 50 feet. But they found this special cable that was able to extend the distance, twisted pair cabling. You could easily get 200 to 300 feet, 60 to 90 meters. Now we start getting some substantial distances for our data cabling. Then, as we had the 80s into the 90s, we had the shift from thick coax to thin coax. Thick coax was too much of a bother to install. We moved over to thin coax. Now we start getting a network infrastructure to support this. And the twisted pair concept was a natural path from that coax bus into the twisted pair star. So now manufacturers start putting our hubs and those sorts of things into the telecommunication rooms. Now we start getting the star topology. That's when standards came on the scene to start developing the proper way to do this, and that's when your EIA standards came along. Eventually TIA, or as we have today, ANSI TIA. So because that, we no longer have just a simple plug it in and go. Things have to be done correctly for everything to work, as we've been learning all semester. Our bandwidths of twisted pair, we're pushing pretty much into the RF transmission category. We routinely use RF tools, and we routinely use RF measurements, dealing with return loss, attenuation, all those things. Because again, we have cranked up the frequency to get more bits per second, more bandwidth, we're into the RF range. Now, just a real quick thing, definition of microwave is any frequency at or above 1,000 megahertz. Now, we're not using microwave signals on cabling, but the definition of microwave is this anything above 1,000 megahertz. Well, we're approaching that. We are in that realm. So we are dealing with substantial RF signals here on our cabling, and therefore we have to install all of our cabling to exacting standards. That's why the standards are there, so that what we're installing should work. So as we look at current networks, We need to know correct components to use, category 5E, those sorts of things. We need to know the correct techniques, half-inch untwist for our terminations, 4 times the cable diameter for the bend radius, pulling tension, distance away from power cords. All these things we've been talking about all semester, all those things need to go into practice so that my system does actually work and my system does actually support the gigabit or 10 gigabit bandwidth that we're trying to put across it. You know, if you think back to the certification lab, our signals actually, our cabling actually passes certification to handle the signals we want to put across it. So, now we need to start talking training versus certification. Well, our training is just that. It's a process of gaining knowledge, and that's kind of what you've been doing all semester. We've been training you on the concepts and the proper way of doing things, reading our books, reading our manuals, doing experiences, that sort of thing. In real life, I could continue this by watching videos or podcasts or webcasts, attending workshops or classes or conferences, and I could even be watching webcasts on specific topics at places like Cabling Install. I'm going to point them out because actually I've watched quite a few of their webcasts from different manufacturers and different installers and so forth. They actually have a whole pile of webcasts here on different topics, and they're updated pretty regularly on things, administration, fiber optic techniques, etc., etc. That would be examples of training. Let me pop back over here. Here we go. Those would be all examples of training. The good part about this is it keeps you up to date. In some cases, you can earn continuing education credits for this. But the bad part about this is I'm not really proving that I know these concepts. That's the only bad part about this. I can go watch the webcast. Doesn't mean I have to turn right around and repeat that, but or repeat that knowledge. But at least it's a way for me to keep up to date. That's the good part about training. On the other hand, something called certification is just that. I need to go to some kind of class or session or training event or log in online, and when I'm done, I usually need to prove that I know a certain body of knowledge. And I'm going to mention right here sometimes when you're working at specific facilities, I actually need to have some sort of certificate to be able to work at those facilities. If we're going to install cabling in a building owned by, I'm just using an example, you know, a particular building, if I'm going to install cabling in it, I need to be certified to be able to do so. I've had friends work in places like that where they need to be certified just to be able to pull cable in a building. So you do run into that from time to time. So certification is just that. I'm attending some kind of class, and I need to pass a certification exam at the end, proving that I know some sort of, you know, bucket of data, a list of topics, if you will. So the good part is it is proof that I know some specific concepts. The bad part of this is these usually are pretty pricey, and these usually do need to be maintained and updated. And that's where the training comes in. I can usually get continuing education credits to keep my certification valid or up to date. So there, real quickly, is just kind of the reminder of training and certification. Well, my training goals are just that, 2 types. There's general purpose training and product specific training. So general purpose training is more conceptualized, provided designated training organization. The goal is really to give the installer knowledge to be able to do a standards-based install that things should work. And one of your big kahunas of general purpose training is Bixby. And if I pop up their site here real quick, I'll go to the Bixby site. This is them right here. This is kind of the big kahuna of general installation training. We'll come back to some of their details here in a minute. Okay. Meanwhile, product specific is just that, manufacturer supplied training. Somebody like a Panduit, somebody like a Leviton, somebody like a Siemens, training you on how to deal with their products. I learned specific techniques and methods for installing their brands of products. Sometimes I'm actually required to do that to properly install their product. Sometimes that manufacturer says your technicians need to be trained on Leviton products to be able to offer a Leviton warranty. Sometimes that sort of thing happens. Kind of like having a Ford mechanic work on a Ford car to be able to keep the Ford warranty. That kind of deal. All right, if I jump back to Bixby, general purpose training then, this kind of formed in the 70s with ties to Bell System, realigned later in the 90s basically to say, hey, this is training to support telecommunications industry as we move ahead to today, data industry. They actually have a couple different credentialing programs. If I take a look at their site, I'm just actually going to pop up their site here real quick again. If I look at their credentialing programs, they actually have a couple here. They have one for, you can load quicker, one for registered communication distribution designer, so somebody aimed at designing systems, one dealing with project management, one dealing with data center design, and then outside plant designer. It's kind of some different tracks of training for cabling infrastructure systems. They also have an installation program, installer 1, installer 2 copper, installer 2 fiber, technician. Again, they have different credentialing programs for different areas of cabling design. That's what I kind of highlighted here too. They also have a design fundamentals program, ICT design fundamentals program, that goes through structured cabling, media selection. Actually, I'll pop it up right here. Here's their fundamentals program. If I pull this guy up, this walks you through structured cabling systems, that's what you guys are learning, media selection, bonding, grounding, network design, project management. We've kind of touched on almost all of those as the semester has gone on. So they have another program in that. Now, one thing you need to recognize here real quick, let me pull up their, I think where they have it under their, under here, let's go to, where do they have that? They have it, I think it's under upcoming calendar events. We'll go it that way. Where do they have that? I was going to look up their training. Maybe it's under here as course descriptions. Actually, it's under training. That's where it is. Training under calendar events. That's the one I'm looking for. If I look at their calendar events for the different courses they offer, no, that's still not it. Let me, hold on a second. One second here. I'll go under course descriptions again. And then I should be able to register online. That's what I'm looking at. This is their list of courses, and then if I do a register online and pick out a particular course that I want to do, data design, telecommunication, actually we'll do the project manager and pick on that one. What I'll find is some of these courses, actually a lot of these courses are in the $1,000 to $2,000 category. Not cheap stuff to do this. Now it's usually like a week-long training, usually like a 5-day training with the exam on Friday kind of thing, maybe Friday afternoon. That's relatively typical of that. So not cheap stuff to do this. Meanwhile, manufacturer-specific training. Again, somebody like a Hubble, Panduit, Leviton is going to train you on specific products for their products, their equipment, their terminations, etc. And even something like a Light Brigade up. I pulled these guys up too. These are specific about fiber optic training. So there's different organizations out there that can do manufacturer-specific training. Now, the certification programs, usually there's a formal certification like a diploma. This could be important, again, like I said, working a specific job, specific site. And the employer might actually require that you do training as you're being hired there, and they should be paying for that. As you see, the price of that is relatively expensive. General purpose training usually offers a test-based certification, like we said. When you're done, you take the test and prove that you know it. Manufacturer specific, they usually give you some kind of certificate saying you completed, and again, that might be necessary for their warranty. Last little part of the chapter, they talk about a couple different jobs: designers, cable system designer, network designer, cabling technician, cabling installer, kind of going from the most experienced down to the least experienced. These would be some possible jobs that you encounter in the kind of cabling installation area. So there's just a real quick overview of cabling certifications and training that you might run into down the road. This would be something that, as I say, put on your radar. You might actually need to go to something like this where you work so you're trained, or they might send you to a class. It's not something to rush right out and do, as you saw by the price of it, but there's something at least put on your radar. And as I said before, probably something you never even thought about being certified in, of cabling installation, copper cabling installation, fiber cabling installation, but that is part of the deal for knowing, or I should say, all the specific information that's part of the deal.